Mac Power Users, episode 535, State of the Platform, Apple Services. Hello, everyone. This is David Sparks, joined by my fellow co-host, Mr. Stephen Hackett. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, David. How are you?
I'm good. I'm broadcasting from a new place for the first time. So the studio upstairs has turned into studio downstairs. I'm still figuring out the audio, so I apologize if the audio is not exactly where you'd like it to be, but it's almost there. And I think we're going to talk about that. We're going to do an after show today. We've been talking about doing it on MPU for a long time. As we record, Apple just released a brand new MacBook Pro 13-inch, and I had some fun moving furniture over the weekend, and I have a cabling problem I want to talk to you about. So we're going to put some of that in the after show today.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. So stay tuned to the very end. We'll have that as a chapter, and we're just going to give it a shot. I think it'll be a fun way to add something to the show.
Yeah, but today we're here to talk about services. I think this is the last chapter in our 2020 State of the Platform for Apple. Do we have any left? I think this is the last one.
Did we do the Apple Watch?
You know, we
got to do the Apple Watch.
Got to do the Apple Watch. Yeah, but anyway, we wanted to talk about services because it's such a, it's kind of funny. That's an afterthought, right? But the
sorry, Apple Watch people.
Yeah, but services. Some people may say, well, why are you doing a show on services? Apple's a hardware company, but services is one of the big things they talk about now when they get guys in suits in the room to talk about stock. And Apple is definitely trying to put the pedal down on increasing revenue on services. And as a result, there's a whole bunch of services available that weren't available before.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk in a little while about maybe some of the pros and cons of this shift. So that's going to kind of be its own section because I think that's a really interesting topic. And you're right. I mean, just going through this, the last week or so preparing for this, it's amazing how many services Apple offers and then how many services are sort of like subsets of other things. When we talk about iCloud is like a dozen different things and they're all their own worlds. But overall, Apple's way better at this, and their services and the features they offer are way more robust than they've ever been, which is good because the joke for a long time was that they were kind of bad at it.
Oh, yeah. No, it wasn't a joke. It was true.
That was the reality.
They were terrible at it. I remember, was it iDrive when they put the drive on your icon on your desktop where you could put a file in? I can't remember if that was part of iTools or .Mac. I don't remember when that first showed up, but I remember the very first time someone described it to me, and I thought, that's amazing. This is before Dropbox and all these cloud sync services. I mean, Apple had the idea of saying, you're going to put a file into this magic folder or drive. It was, drive, I'm pulling up air quotes, on your desktop. And then it's just going to be part of your cloud account. And if you've got multiple Macs, you can access that data on the other drives as well. And the first time I did it, I put an image in there. And of course, it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
And then my disappointment just started increasing as I started putting smaller and smaller size files in. And ultimately, I got to the point where I put in like a 1-paragraph text file, and it didn't load. And I did it in my office. I remember doing it, say, at my desk in my office. And I drove home and when I had dinner, I checked it wasn't there. Then I went to go to bed and the text file was there.
Wow.
It was literally 4 hours later.
You could have walked it home on a floppy drive faster.
I almost felt like there was somebody in the Apple server place that, like one of those old-fashioned telephone operators, and they're like, okay, there's this text file. Now take it to the other building, plug it in, and send it to his laptop or whatever. It was completely bananas, and I gave up hope entirely on it. But that's not true anymore. Now with iCloud, they've done a lot better, and we definitely have some gripes during this episode. I have a couple things going on with iCloud right now that I'm scratching my head over, but they are not a joke anymore.
No. And you mentioned iTools. That was sort of the first version of it. And then there was .Mac, which is where I joined. So my Apple ID is a .Mac Apple ID, which I'm oddly proud of, which is kind of silly. But and then Mobile Me, and then iCloud. I've written both about iTools and Mobile Me. I need to write about .Mac. I realize I haven't done it in preparation for this. So you can go read about those services. And they've added things and taken things away. over the years. I remember when I joined with .Mac, you could use the iDisk stuff, is what it was called, iDisk. You could use iDisk to host a website. And so I built like a little website in HTML, and all the styles were in line as before CSS was really a thing. And I hosted it on .Mac for a long time, and I just shared a photograph a week. That was my thing. And I ran it for 2 or 3 years in college.
I totally get what you say about having the email at mac.com address. I still proudly use mine. And like my kids, when they were little, I set them up with at mac.com email addresses, my wife. And like now when I go to the Apple store, and recently I bought something, they're like, you could make that at me.com. I'm like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah.
They looked at me like, oh, you're one of those guys.
Yeah. It's cool. It's cool. That's still the Apple ID my wife and I use to purchase things.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that can relate. It's like, pry my mac.com email address out of my cold, dead hands.
Right.
Apple.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Mobile Me is a really interesting chapter. I mean, go read the article I wrote a couple years ago, but it was a big move. Apple they framed it as like exchange for the rest of us. So you'd have contacts and calendars and email syncing between all your devices. This is the first time the iPhone sort of stepped out on its own away from like iTunes, right? Before this, you had to sync your mail settings from a Mac or PC. It's like, hey, no, you can just set it up on the phone and it just does these things. And it was really bad at first. A lot of people, I was a genius at the time. A lot of people had a lot of issues. They eventually got that sorted mostly, but the damage was done and they rebranded it and rebuilt it as iCloud. Actually, in what was Steve Jobs' last public keynote was the iCloud keynote. And it's amazing, even iCloud, as we'll talk about it, what has been added to that over time. It's way bigger than it was then.
Just going back to that Mobile Me fiasco, it's a remarkable how a bad launch can just ruin a product. And in that case, it absolutely did. There was, at the time that it launched, and this was one of the mistakes they made is they launched Mobile Me the same day as they released a new iOS update. And they didn't phase it out over time, so their servers blew up. And somebody wrote, maybe it was you, I don't remember who it was, but they wrote that they had this vision of Steve Jobs wandering the hallways at Cupertino with a flamethrower.
I wish I'd written that. That's really good.
And it was like, do you work on Mobile Me? Is he standing there with a flamethrower?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there was this famous meeting where he said, he got everybody in there and he said, Mobile Me people, what is the job of Mobile Me? And then someone stands up and says, it's going to sync data. And then he says, why the bleep doesn't it do that? And that was and then he walks out of the room. So I don't know how much truth there is to that, but they really did a poor job of getting themselves out of this cloud thing. And it's still to this day, I think, a reputation Apple has is that these guys don't know what they're doing with the cloud services.
I mean, Steve Jobs makes a note in the iCloud keynote about why would you trust us? We're the people who brought you Mobile Me. He was fully aware of the situation they were in. And I think as we get into this, there's still some public perception about iCloud and its quality. But really the point to me is just that they have continued to evolve this over time, that iCloud is what it was, I guess in 2010, 2011 is drastically different than it is now. And if you look at Apple's system status page, if you haven't seen this, there's a link in the show notes. It is a dashboard of all of Apple's online systems, and not just things like iCloud, but Maps routing and navigation, Maps search, Maps traffic, and Maps display are 4 different services. And you can see if they're having issues. So I've used this before of I can't, my Safari bookmarks aren't syncing or whatever. And I can go in here and say, oh, well, they're having issues with this or that. And it's a very helpful tool if you run into issues. And they even keep a little history on there. So we can see as we record this right now, there was a Apple Music issue a couple of days ago. It's really cool. And Apple, this is a new Apple thing. Apple in the Mobile Me days would have never had this because it would all just been red, I think. But it is a handy tool if you're experiencing issues with a service.
Yeah, I was just looking. I think I've written probably multiple times at MacSparky back in those days about Apple learning to walk and chew gum. It's okay, you make great hardware. You've got to get this cloud thing figured out. And I think as we sit here today, they are a company that is good at the cloud, but it's not their central focus like the way hardware and software are, if that makes sense. And to flip it to Google, the obvious inverse of this is Google is very good at the cloud, but that's their focus, whereas they're getting good at making hardware and software, but clearly Google's all about the cloud. And, I guess in the best world, Apple would have both skills mastered, that they would be really good at making software and hardware, and they would be bringing equal expertise to the cloud. But that doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't. It has been a real dedicated effort on their part, and I think there's a lot of effort on the user side to trust this stuff. And I just think about you and your journey with iCloud Drive. It takes work on both sides, both Apple and its customers, to make this stuff successful, right? Like if a service is launched in the woods and no one hears it, like did it really fall or whatever the saying is? That really fell apart on me. But you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
They've got to see what customers want. They've got to build that. Customers have to actually trust it. And it's this cycle that they've been in for several years now. And I think it's really beginning to pay off for them.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, to a large extent, they are a reliable cloud data service now. And there's plenty of normal users using it with no problems whatsoever. And there's a lot of cranky nerds like us that are afraid of it. But at the same time, I think they have mastered some of this. And I think one of the things, and we're going to talk about some of this later in the show too, but I do think the bar is lower now. I mean, I think the first time someone wanted to make a text file sync across multiple platforms, you were starting from scratch. And now there's a lot of knowledge out there, and there are a lot of people that have worked with this synchronizing stuff. I mean, I think about companies like the Omni Group. They run their own sync engine for their software because they wanted to be responsible to their customers. They said, we don't want to say it's Apple's fault. It's us. You give it to us, we'll make sure it works. But that's not a very big company. And when I was up there in Seattle last year for a conference, I got the opportunity to go see their server room. And it's, there's a stack of servers in there that are running sync for all of their users. And granted, Apple's a much bigger user base, much more data, but companies that are not Google can now master this. And the knowledge is out there, and Apple has a lot of money to hire the right people and build the server farms they need. So, I obviously they have room to grow with this, but I think they're making the necessary investments.
Yeah, you don't build data centers around the world if you're not serious about it, right? Right. I mean, I can't imagine what those things cost Apple, and they've done a good job of making them green and all that stuff. But just the outlay of funding to build and then to staff those things and to continue to improve them, it's a big deal, And it's weird for us as people who mostly focus on hardware and software, but iCloud in particular, but Apple services in general. They have their fingers in all sorts of different parts of the ecosystem, right? iCloud is the glue that holds hardware and software and your data together for Apple. Like you can use an iPhone without an iCloud account, but the experience is worse. And there's pros and cons of that, which we'll talk about. But it's just so interesting to me that even in our conversations of hardware and software, we have to talk about services too, because they really are three pieces of the puzzle that go together.
Yeah, and at this point, services are so integrated that it changes the hardware experience. I mean, we want iPhones, iPads, and Macs, and we want them to talk to each other. If you go back to the MPU archives, one of the very first episodes Katie and I recorded 10 years ago was how to sync data. And Apple wasn't worried about it at that point. We had to do it on our own. And we had all these goofy things we would do with applications to copy data to drives. And users don't want that. I mean, we just want to turn the thing on and have it work. And this is a very necessary part of the Apple business at this point. Mm-hmm. So you want to get started?
Yeah, let's talk about iCloud.
Yeah, iCloud. What a word, right?
It's a huge umbrella term that covers all sorts of different features. And we're going to walk through the major ones. I will say quickly that on MPU 522, which we recorded back at the beginning of the year, we spoke about the family sharing aspect of all of this. So we're not really going to touch on that today. But if you are in a family, you've got a significant other or kids or whatever, and you want to have multiple people share a bunch of iCloud stuff, go listen to that episode because we talk all about it. We walk you through how to set it up, some of the pitfalls. Both David and I are using it to success in our households, but if you want to learn more about that, go check out MPU 522.
Yeah, we will do that. And but iCloud, other than family sharing, it still means a ton of things. I feel like Apple just does, if anything involves data on a server somewhere, we're just going to call it iCloud.
Yeah. I mean, it's everything from, like you were saying, like you put a picture in a folder and it syncs, to data that's in your address book and with your contacts and email and calendar. So anything that is information that you want on other devices that you own that are in the Apple ecosystem, iCloud is the bucket that it's going to end up in.
Yeah, one of my gripes, honestly, is when people generalize the term iCloud with a judgment. iCloud sucks, iCloud is great. That's not really, I think, a good way to think about it. I think iCloud Drive versus iCloud backup services versus iCloud contact sync, they're all very different animals, and we just need to figure out. I think you're better kind of being more specific when you have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to start with iCloud Drive? I know this is an area you have really spent a lot of time with.
Yeah, it is. I was an early adopter because I like using the iPad remotely so much, and because it certainly is a more favored file sharing platform for the device, and frankly, increasing frustration with Dropbox. I wanted to use iCloud Drive, and 2 or 3 years ago now, at least 2 years ago, I just moved all my data to iCloud Drive, and it's largely been a good experiment. I mean, I haven't had much problem at all. I had late last quarter, I had the first time I ever found a syncing problem. There was some files in my action folder that didn't make it onto the laptop. And so I turned off iCloud Drive on the laptop and turned it back on, and it restored them. But the fact that for some reason it wasn't getting them was of concern to me. But, I guess I kind of got into the weeds too quickly. The idea of iCloud Drive is you've got a folder full of documents or files that just show up everywhere.
Yeah. Not unlike Dropbox, right?
Yeah.
And you were talking about Steve Jobs stories. There's a story from Drew Houston, who's the founder of Dropbox. And he said that, they had a meeting with Steve Jobs, and Jobs basically called Dropbox very kind of famously that it was a feature, not a product. And it is just a feature of iCloud, right? It's not a separate thing. But Dropbox is still around. Box is still around. There's lots of competing services. I think partially because iCloud Drive has been slow to adopt new features. As we're recording this, just very recently have we been able to share folders between users, right? So you and I could move our shared MPU folder to iCloud if we wanted to. But the issue I have with that is not everybody I work with has an iCloud account or has an iCloud account with enough space to move a bunch of big WAV files around, right? Dropbox has become the default for many of us. But iCloud Drive is catching up, which is good. But this should be a rock solid thing, and it's an understood problem, right? People know what they want out of a service like this, so it's good to see Apple continuing to improve it.
Yeah, agreed. But they are behind Dropbox in terms of features. They may be behind a little bit on speed as well. But with my laptop, I just decided I wasn't going to install Dropbox, so I've had it now 6 months or so, and I've never had Dropbox installed, and that felt kind of good because the installation process for Dropbox goes pretty deep onto the operating system.
Mm-hmm.
So when I need to put a file in Dropbox on the laptop, I just open the browser and copy it in, which is not very frequent. I feel like podcasters kind of have a natural bias as they talk about this stuff because we all do have this very specific thing where we share a very large file once every week or two.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if Dropbox is as necessary for people who are not doing that. I guess there's a couple different kind of like user profiles. There's the people who need to share with multiple platforms, Windows, Macintosh, Android, whatever. They absolutely need a third-party service, and Dropbox is probably the one for them. Then there's the people who just want to share the stuff between their own devices. And if they're on all Apple platforms, I think I could recommend iCloud, having used it for a couple of years now with no significant problems.
I was thinking about my wife Mary and this. She has a Dropbox account, but it's mostly just, I think the only thing in her Dropbox account is shared folders between us. It's like, yeah, we could probably get away with iCloud Drive, right? It's just some spreadsheets and stuff that we update once every couple of months. It's not a big deal.
Might be a good experiment.
Yeah.
Just to see how that goes.
I think so. But yeah, iCloud Drive has come a long way. I think it really had a bad reputation at launch. I think that was deserved. But I think Apple's really worked hard to improve it over the years. And, people like you wouldn't keep using it if it was a nightmare. So I view that success as a real thing and not just something we want to imagine.
Yeah, well, I'm very careful. I still feel like it's on probation, even though it's been years. I mean, because of that kind of Apple reputation for cloud services, I think I give more scrutiny to it than I ever gave to Dropbox. And like I said, I did have where I had scanned some files and they didn't show up on the laptop, but I was able to fix that by turning it off and on. And I know people listening are saying, well, don't you see, you dummy, that's why nobody should use it. I mean, if you have to do that, then it's not good enough yet. And I can see that point of view, but I do like the integration, and I've always been a fan of using the software made by the same people who make the hardware and the operating system, because they do generally work better.
Oh yeah, that's Apple's that's their whole selling point on all this stuff. Really, I mean, Dropbox and Google and these other services can interplay with files and mail and some other things, but nothing's going to beat the thing that's made by the same people.
The other big one, I think, for iCloud, the one that's the deal breaker for a lot of people is PhotoSync, because I don't know what's more important data that you have on your devices than all the pictures of your life and your family that you've taken. And a lot of us now have put our eggs in the Apple basket with PhotoSync.
I have. At the beginning of this, I had some issues, which I wrote about and got straightened out. But since then, I mean, I've got just tons and tens of thousands of photos and a bunch of videos in my photos library. It syncs with iCloud. It's fast. It's reliable. There's there's only really one current bug that bothers me, is that my albums won't stay ordered in alphabetical order. I don't know why, but they come out sometimes and it doesn't make any sense. But as far as actual data, I've been really happy with it. And with the addition of things like syncing metadata for faces and places and those sorts of things, searching across a big library has become a lot better. That was something that wasn't great in the early days, but they have fixed that too. And honestly, it's one of those things where I basically just, if you can afford the additional iCloud space, I really recommend it, because it's so fantastic to have all of your photos on all of your devices. And per device, you can set it. Say, I just want thumbnails, or I want full resolution. So I keep full res images on my Mac Pro so I can back them up. Everything else gets thumbnails. So as I'm not using up a bunch of data on my devices, and it's really a rock solid system.
Yeah, I've spent the last 4.5 months working on the Photos Field Guide, and it is imminent, the release. So we'll be covering photos in more detail in a very near future show. But I can tell you, I spent a lot of time looking at file integrity, and it's just been great. I have over 50,000 images, and they sync everywhere, and I am constantly bringing other iPads into the ecosystem and other devices and my family. And I mean, I'm stressing photos about as much as somebody can, and I think it's great. Now, that being said, I have to say this every time. There's two things. Number one is the recommendation I make the most but hate to make the most is do pay for photo storage. If you're going to use Apple photo storage, pay for as much as you need. And I'm hesitant to tell you to give Apple more money. I don't think we should have to give them money. I think they should be able to just give us storage when we buy their $1,000 phones. But nevertheless, pay for it because you need it. And the second thing is, if there's any way possible, like if you've got a laptop with an external drive or a big iMac, or if you can download your images at the same time because they're your photos. I've never needed that backup, but it makes me rest easier knowing I have it. And, the iCloud photo dream is that you just have them all up on Apple storage. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to make backups. They take care of the whole thing for you. I haven't, gone that far down the rabbit hole.
So what about, we're talking about space. So I think backup service is a good thing to put here as well. your iOS devices, so your iPhones, your iPad, etc., can all back up to iCloud automatically. It makes restoring really easy. The last couple of years, they've made this a lot more robust. It's still a little slow to restore a phone on day one if you get a new phone, the day it comes out. But I just restored an iPad recently, and it was really pretty quick. There's some holes in this. There's really no Mac up. There's no Mac up.
I like that.
Yeah, there's no Mac up. There's no Mac backup. So there's no Mac backup feature, and that was something that .Mac had. It was a utility called Backup, and you could do a lot of things with it. But one of the things was you could put stuff on your iDisk. But I would like to see them bring some sort of utility to the Mac, so I could choose what I'd want to have backed up to iCloud. I mean, not everything. I'm not asking for Time Machine in the cloud, or I understand that I've got a 4 terabyte internal drive. That would be ridiculous. But I would like to be able to, hey, just make a copy of this documents folder or whatever, and store it in iCloud. I think that would be nice.
Do you think if Apple, I mean, here's a company that's trying to increase services revenue. Do you think there's a whiteboard somewhere in Cupertino that says, why don't we make a backup service? I mean, people pay for it, pay good money for it.
Yeah, I think there could be. I would imagine that on their scale, though, that's maybe difficult. I think that's why and I agree with you on the storage pricing 100%. But I think that's why they haven't done that too. Is that their scale to give everybody 2 terabytes of space, it's just impossible, right? Where somebody like Backblaze or CrashPlan, they're still big, but it's a fraction of what Apple could have. And I would imagine that's the limiting factor.
I mean, there are even limits for Apple's money. I think I read someplace that by the time they get done with the, building these server farms, it's, in the neighborhood of $1 billion to build one of these server farms. I mean, these are massive, massive farms and all solar powered and all the stuff they go through to make these things. So even Apple has some limits, but I think it's a capacity problem. I think if they had the capacity, they'd like to probably give us the photo storage or not. Who knows? I guess it depends. It's on your opinion of Apple, but but I think they certainly would like to take more money from us to do Mac backups if they had the capacity. But I suspect they just don't have it right now.
I think that's exactly right.
I like the idea of a Mac up, though. If they announce that at WWDC, I think they, we'll know where they got the idea.
That's right. You hear me, Phil? You can call it the Mac up.
just send Steven, another Mac Pro as payment.
Yeah.
So we can have a pair.
Or just the wheels, maybe.
Oh, it's just the wheels. But once again, that 5 gigabyte cap, the backup is great. I've never had a problem with it. I've used it many times. I think that's something that is a part of iCloud that's not controversial, and it just works for the iOS devices, at least.
Yeah, same here. I've used it. I've had like family members like buy a new phone and ask me what to do. And it's like, well, if you're backed up to iCloud, here's how you check that. If it's backed up, just restore from the backup. You don't worry about any other thing. It'll really go smoothly for you.
All right. What's the next piece of iCloud?
Oh, we have dubbed this data sync. It's like just a grab bag of stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to start with mail, though. It is the oldest feature of this. This was part of the deal, way back in those way early services. You get a at iCloud.com email address or .me or .mac. If you're is older, you get to keep those, which is cool. This is IMAP email. It syncs really quickly. You get push notifications on iOS and Mac OS. My issue with it, though, and I always bring this up when we talk about this, is really wimpy server-side rules. The reason I use Gmail for my personal email is server-side rules. So I can have things go into folders automatically or have things, stay red or pick up a flag. You can do all sorts of things with that. And I've really built a system in there that I really rely on, both personally and professionally. And the iCloud email it doesn't have that robust of a set of tools for that. And I think the other thing it lacks a little bit, maybe it's better now. I haven't used iCloud as my primary email account in years. But at the time I gave up on it, the spam filtering was pretty crummy too. It really seemed to rely on your local devices to do spam filtering. It has it in the cloud, but it wasn't nearly as good as Gmail's, and that got frustrating as well for me.
Yeah, it's definitely better now, the spam filtering, but the web-based filtering rules are just as bad. There's nothing new to it. And you're right, Google runs circles around them with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue that Apple Mail runs circles around Google if you are using the Apple Mail application on your Mac. And, kind of getting back to, like, we did a show last year about using a Mac Mini as a home server. This is kind of where you can really go bananas with this stuff if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I played with the Google stuff, which is good, but I feel like the Apple Mail rules, which is not cloud-based, really, does a number on Google. But also, for me, SaneBox, which is a longtime sponsor, full disclosure, yada, yada, yada. But they kind of handle the cloud-based stuff for me. So I've been using iCloud, and the sync is great. All the things you said are true. And I've never, to my knowledge, had any problem with loss of data. And, when I create a folder on one device, it goes to the other place. And my mail is pretty complicated because I am using SaneBox with many custom folders, and it just works. But I mean, that's the idea of IMAP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That your stuff is the same everywhere. And Apple actually was one of the very first companies to implement IMAP in a consumer mail product. I mean, at the time, it's before Gmail, or before Gmail was big, at least, like Yahoo and stuff. It was all POP3, which falls down the second you have a second device. And so Apple really pushed IMAP out early. And like, don't get me wrong, I know there are a lot of people out there using it, and it works really well for them. And I may give it another shot in the future, but at least for now, Gmail's a better fit for what I need.
I get what you're saying. I mean, I've been tempted by the siren song of Gmail cloud rules, but the problem is for me is once you use Gmail, it's like adopting a lifestyle,
Oh yeah, no, there's a secret club, and
Yeah.
and the reality is we're going to talk about this as we go through. My data is pretty split between Google and iCloud, right? So I use Gmail personally, and I use just the snot out of Google Drive and Google Docs and everything. But then all my calendars and contacts are on iCloud. So if I log into Gmail on the web, none of my contacts are there because they're all on iCloud. So like, I definitely live this splintered life. Now, I only really deal with these things through native applications on my phone, iPad, or Mac, which just does a good job at blending all of them. So like, Mail on the Mac doesn't care that I'm sending through a Gmail account, but my contacts are synced to iCloud, right? It has no concept of that. But if you are using the web, say at work, to access your personal stuff, it really pays off to have everything in one place.
Yeah, and the other issue I have with that is just I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the Google Mail applications.
Yeah,
I'm not really a fan of any mail application, but Apple Mail and I have this relationship with each other where once in a while we give each other dirty looks, but we still do what the other one asks.
Yeah.
So. And I just feel like adding Gmail to it is just going to, it might end up in a divorce. Don't want that. But I don't know. I mean, we're going to do a show on email. It's been a long time since we covered it on MPO. I've changed a bunch of my workflows. I want to hear Steven's, and we'll hear from the listeners as well when we do that. But yeah, so the general thing, the question of this show is iCloud sufficient for Apple Mail, and I think it is. It's fine. Calendar. Then it starts getting into all the weird stuff, calendars and contacts and Apple Notes and things like that. Now, we did a calendar show, and I heard from multiple listeners saying that they've had problems with iCloud calendar sync. I have never had a problem with it. Have you ever had any issues with iCloud calendars or contacts?
Not in any sort of widespread issue, and never with contacts. I do have a problem occasionally where in the Mac calendar app, and it may just be the Mac app, it's probably not even iCloud. Say I create an event on my personal calendar, but then I need to move it to my wife's calendar. I just started on the wrong calendar. About 50% of the time, I look like an hour later, and it's moved back to the original calendar it started on. So I don't know if that's iCloud or not. That's not a big deal because, at least in my family, we have a calendar for myself and my wife, one for the kids. Then we have one called family events. It's like, we're all doing this. And my wife and I can see everything on all of them. So like the most annoying thing that could happen is it's the wrong color. And that bothers somebody like me. She doesn't care. But That's the only thing I see. And like I said, it happens pretty often, but I don't know if it's the Mac client or iCloud to blame. But I've never had it lose data. I've never opened a contact and all of a sudden the phone number's wrong or missing, or all my pictures are gone from my contacts. That all that stuff has been solid for me for ages.
Yeah. And what you described to me with the calendar event almost sounds like a conflict, like the server conflict. It looked and saw that it still had the version with you, it being your calendar, and saying, oh, there's a problem here. But the server says it's Steven, so we'll make it Steven.
Yeah. I don't know. It's somewhere where the two meet, I think.
Yeah. No, I have generally had really good luck with it. Now, I have heard from listeners that have problems with contacts, and quite often, if we get into an email exchange, I find out that they've got Google contacts, Microsoft 365 contacts, and Apple contacts, iCloud contacts. And when you start putting several different accounts into a single contacts app, even though it fully supports that, I think that does lead to mayhem sometimes.
It can, or you can have something in an account that you didn't realize it was in, and it can get confusing quick.
I'll tell you, one of the nicest things when I quit my job was getting off of the Microsoft bandwagon and just having all of my legal stuff. I just put it all into iCloud, and I just have really clever use of groups and contacts, and it works so nice, and it has been much easier having them all in one cloud syncing platform since I've done that.
I had that at my last job. We used G Suite for our work, and so I had all my work clients in that contacts, and I had it syncing to my devices. But ultimately, I would accidentally put a private, contact in the work one, or vice versa. And it is nice just to have one big contact soup, and just everyone's in there together. That's a very troubling metaphor. That's very troubling.
The contact soup.
Contact soup.
Well, whatever. Let's just go with that.
I'm full of good words today. Mac up, contact soup. There's another one coming. I feel it. Man,
do not make fun of Mac up. I think I need to do a Mac up every day. I love that.
You should. You gotta get that Mac up going.
Okay, so the one that you would think would fit in would be Apple Notes, but Apple Notes to me is more sorted. I remember talking to a guy at WWDC a few years ago. And when you go to WWDC, there's a lot of people there that work for, different companies. Some of them make fruit. And someone telling me that the sync mechanism for Apple Notes was different from that of contacts and calendars, and that they had kind of inherited something, and it was a little bananas, but it was getting fixed. And it just left me feeling uncomfortable, And at the time, I had like 1,000 notes in Apple Notes. And I haven't generally had any problems with it, but I am like, one of the things I have is like, I call it text bank. I have, as lawyers, every time we see a contract clause that we like, we copy it. And you never know, you may need something like that, up your sleeve one day. So I've got these, many, many bits of text I have indexed and organized that I use. And I moved all of that out of Apple Notes into Ulysses a year or two ago. And so I just kind of I didn't divest from Apple Notes, but I try to treat Apple Notes as kind of my version of Evernote. It's stuff that takes rich text and, notes that need pictures attached to them and whatnot. But in prepping for today's show, I said, well, I was thinking about this Apple Note and I was writing it in the outline. I said, well, let me just go back and look how everything is in Apple Notes. And I went and looked in, because I copied all the, the contract text out of Apple Notes, but I didn't delete it. I just left it there because you never know, right? Nothing wrong with belt and suspenders. And the stuff was there, but the folder structure was all gone. Like they were all organized into subfolders, but the folder structure was gone on my iOS devices, but not on my Mac.
Yikes.
Right? I'm like, did I lose data? I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be something to talk about on Mac Power users. And then I started searching. Data's all there. All the notes are still there, but they have been removed. And the folder that they were in is there, but they've been moved to the general tab. They're basically unclassified notes.
Yikes.
But on the Mac, they are still classified. And so I discovered this last Wednesday when I started writing this outline. So I've been playing with it. I have unsynced on. So the first thing I did was I turned off the Apple Notes sync. You can go to preferences on your iOS device to iCloud, just scroll down to notes, turn it off and turn it back on. And then it took several hours to kind of, re-download and update itself. But it still didn't put the notes in the folders that they belonged. And then I tried with the iPad. I just did the nuke and pave on the iPad. Guys, this is what I do for the listeners. Just let me tell you, I wouldn't have gone through all this, but I wanted to come back to the show and say it's all fixed now. So I went through the process. I nuke and pave the iPad. Still, after all that, still doesn't have them in the folders. And now I'm starting to think that the error in terms of iCloud's thoughts are my Macs, that the Macs are the ones. If I turned off and turned it on the Macs, then they would restore it to the state where I'd lose all this organization. But I'm afraid to do it. So, Apple Notes isn't perfect still.
And that really moves us into a place of talking about my sort of my big complaint about iCloud stuff is that troubleshooting is just hard. Your only option is basically to turn things off and turn them back on.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't know what Apple can do about that, but I think they've got to do something because it's just difficult to get your hands around what's happening when things go wrong.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty frustrating because one device has it right and one device does not. So it's like it knows at some point that this is what I wanted. In the meantime, I have...
What does the iCloud website have? Have you looked there?
You know what? I haven't. Let me... I will do that during the first ad break. I will do that.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's run through the rest of these. We're kind of down into the minor features now. We have messages in the cloud, which is new as of last year. And it basically just will sync your iMessage conversations and data to iCloud. So they're much faster to restore. They stay in sync better. I think most people probably won't notice a huge difference between this on and off, but I've had it on since it launched, and the iMessage stuff seems perfectly fine to me. They all show up at the same place. If I turn my Mac on after a weekend, it catches up quickly. So I think that's one that you could flip on without much stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I use all the time. This one took a little while to arrive, but once they delivered it, it seems like it's a stable feature.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the Safari data, bookmarks, open tabs, passwords. I have never had any problem with any of that stuff.
Me neither. And that's just been around a really long time. I absolutely love the ability to sync open tabs. So right now, if I hit the iCloud tabs button on the Mac, I see the browser windows that are open on my iPad, the ones that are open on my phone. I got one opened on my laptop, apparently. I can close them remotely or I can visit them right from there. That is absolutely fantastic and a huge reason to use Safari, honestly, across all of your things. For a long time, I used Chrome on the Mac, and I gave Safari a try, I don't know, maybe half a year or a year ago. And the iCloud stuff is one reason that I've stuck with it. All those little features are really nice to have.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'm on record on that one. I mean, battery life, and just once again, the common idea of having everything be simple. And when you've got Apple's browser and you've got all these devices, they have engineered everything to work easily with Apple's browser. I get that, like if you're heavily using like Google Docs, you may want to have Chrome, but the path of least resistance for a lot of people is just using Safari. Text replacement. This is another one where I have had mixed results with iCloud. And it was terrible for a long time. Up until about a year or two ago, it just did not synchronize. I could not, I would try to get it to synchronize, and I had a different set of text replacements on literally every Apple device. Now it's working better, but it still doesn't 100% of the time work. What's your experience with text replacement?
Yeah, I had a lot of trouble with it in the early days, and I haven't ever really revisited it. They're a sponsor, but Text Expander has so many more features that I need. I'm fine switching to the Text Expander keyboard on iOS. Now, the Magic Keyboard on the iPad, you've got to switch to a software keyboard. It's not ideal, but I still prefer the features of a more powerful application here. And I think I may have a couple things in Apple's text replacement, and they're probably sync everywhere, but honestly, I haven't touched it in years.
Yeah, there was a note, I forget who, I should have looked up before we recorded, but one of the listeners did a post in the forum how if you take a snippet with a carriage return in it and you paste it in on the Mac, in text replacement for the Apple iCloud service, it'll work on iOS. And then Dr. Drang wrote a post about it. So they're getting a little better with that, but I feel like, man, that it is just so pedestrian compared to what I get with, our sponsor Text Expander. So I don't use it much either. Universal Clipboard came out as a big deal. The idea is you save something in your clipboard on your iOS device and it shows up on your Mac or vice versa. Do you find yourself using that much, Stephen?
I use it from time to time between my iPhone and computer, but not very often. And one thing that kind of drives me a little batty about it is if I have my MacBook Pro open on my desk and it's just doing something, I'm not actually actively using it, out of the corner of my eye, I'll see Finder pop up, be like, copying from iCloud. It's like, no, I don't, just do it. I don't have to see it. It's fine. It is helpful in those situations where you just need to quickly get something from one place to another. In the past, I would have used Apple Notes or, in the olden days, like you sent yourself a text message. Remember that? It's like, I need this photo somewhere else. I'll just send myself an iMessage. But it seems to work pretty well for me. And, the few times a month I need it.
You remember that app Copied?
I do. I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, it seems like they're not in active development anymore. And I just had a friend write me and ask, what's a good substitute for it? And there really isn't one that's made to be exactly what that is. Or if there is, let me know. I'm not aware of it. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like Apple should be incorporating this as an iCloud service, that just when you save to the clipboard, it has a running clipboard history, and maybe you make an app or do it under the settings tab, or just have somewhere where the user can access clipboard history and make it work across all platforms. And I know there are third-party apps that do this, but there's really not a good way to do this across iOS to Mac platforms. And Apple would be in the best place to do it, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
A similar one is Handoff, where you can work on an email on your iPad and just jump on the Mac and pick up where you left off. Do you use that one much?
Never.
I do occasionally.
Never. I have it on my phone and my desktop. I have it off my laptop and iPad. But it's a couple times a year. Most of the time, I accidentally, I'll have Overcast open on my phone and I'll accidentally tab to it because it pulls up a Safari handoff window, and then I'll accidentally open Overcast in my browser. Most of the time, it's not what I wanted to do.
Does more trouble than good?
For me, at least, but I very rarely will start a task on one device and then need to move it to another. That's just not the way that I work generally. Other times where I work on a piece of writing multiple places, and that's in Google Docs or Tot or something, but very rarely am I like, oh, let me pick up this presentation on my iPad and then move it to my laptop. I'll just save it and reopen it. Just the way handoff works doesn't seem to work with my brain very well.
Yeah, some of the email I write in the lawyer job are very complicated, and I do need to think about them. And sometimes I will start it on the iPad and finish it on the iMac, or vice versa. So I do find myself using it on occasion. It's a solid feature. It works. You usually see a little bouncy app in your dock when you jump from one platform to the next, and it says, "Hey, you want to pick up where you left off?" And It's just fine. It's a good service. The only couple that I've mentioned here that really give me a little heartburn are Apple Notes. Really, overall, I think Apple's doing pretty good with this stuff, and the little features seems like they do fine with those. I think where they get into trouble is where they get hit with lots of data and users outside the normal profile. And I think my Apple Notes is outside the normal profile, north of 1,000 notes. But you know what? It should work with north of 1,000 notes. It should work with 10,000 notes. That's what the app does. Mm-hmm. If you're going to let me make 10,000 notes, you should be able to sync 10,000 notes.
That's a good point.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password, our favorite service for managing your passwords. With 1Password, you just have to remember the 1Password. Gets you into the application. It unlocks all of your websites and services for you. There's so many features with 1Password to talk about. You can store specific data on your vault. It works with all the security features on your iPhone and your iPad. It even auto fills in your password information on websites and applications for you using Apple services. And the thing I love about 1Password is the idea that they just never stop working on the application. Just recently, they released version 7.5 for iOS, And even though the world may feel like it's on pause, that's not the 1Password team. They just keep going. Some of the features that they've got now are tags and favorites that make it a breeze to keep everything organized in 1Password. You can use multiple tags on a single item, and there's no limit to the number of tags you can create. And this release rolls out a new tag editor that allows you to effortlessly apply new and existing tags to your items. This is especially great if you have a family plan, because with a family plan, everybody's got different things that are important to them. Like we have a tag for school, and then I can get all those together, or get one for all the various people I pay to put content on my TV, which seems like it's a lot of them, Stephen. So tags can now be added to an item without needing to edit first. And while viewing an item, tap the Add Tag button to unveil the all-new tag editor. They've got easier sharing. They've got better sorting. They've just got a really solid release here with version 7.5. I recommend you download it. I was lucky enough to get into the beta for 1Password, and I've been running 7.5 for a while. It's solid, and go get it. But there's a lot more you can do with 1Password. Just create strong and unique passwords, protect yourself, your family, your coworkers. And if you go over to 1Password.com/MPU and make that in all caps, you get 20% off. Who doesn't want 20% off, man? Get to save some money, protect your passwords. And while you're home with your family, you can teach your significant other and your kids how to have some password security at the same time. So once again, that's 1Password.com/MPU in all caps. Get your 20% off and start protecting your online security today. Thanks, 1Password.
All right, so let's move on into the other subscription services. So we got, this is mostly media stuff. Again, check out the family sharing episode, because all of these services are underneath that umbrella. And these can all be mixed and matched. As of this recording, at least, Apple does not have a sort of umbrella services subscription where you can pay X a month and get iCloud and these other things. They're all a la carte. So we're going to talk about them individually. I'm hopeful that changes. I think it would make sense for Apple to have like kind of like Amazon Prime has, where you just get a bunch of stuff. I think it'd be cool to see Apple do that. They haven't done it yet, but I hope that's coming, because this gets complicated to talk about, and like trying to figure out what you've paid for and what's in your account or not can be a little messy. I wish Apple could tidy that up for us.
I totally agree. Let's go through them though, and just kind of see how we see them fitting in the state of the platform. Starting with the original Apple Music.
Yeah. This started outside of Apple. Remember, this was Beats Music, and they bought it and brought it in to compete with Spotify and, well, now they're dead, but RDO and, other things that have come and gone. I was late to Apple Music. I was one of those people, probably unsurprisingly, that carefully crafted my iTunes library over a decade, right? Ripping CDs and then purchasing music.
Yeah.
And I was just nervous about combining that with a streaming service. And I was admittedly hesitant about the idea of renting my music, right? I like the fact that I bought this, even though it's just a digital file, and now I own it. But several years ago, I took it for a spin, and I found that actually I really like Apple Music. I like that I can explore albums and artists I haven't heard. And I'm not a huge proponent of that. I don't very often go out and listen to the playlists that they create. I know a lot of people who do and who really like them. I tend to kind of know what I like and expand out slowly. But it means that when an artist has a new album, I can just tap add to my library and it's there. And if I want it locally, I can download it. I have all that history because you can upload your local music from the before times. That used to be separate through iTunes Match, and now they've sort of merged all of it together. But yeah, this is one that I use and pay for. We have a family plan, so my wife uses it as well. And both of us really enjoy it.
Yeah, agreed. I love music, and I listen to a lot of obscure 1950s jazz. So I was very much on board with it. Like you, I was hesitant to streaming services initially because I guess I'm an old guy, and that's what we thought. You just buy your music, you wouldn't rent it, right? I grew up, buying albums. My wife and I were talking about when we were in high school and how we both would spend our money on very different but records, and that was a thing in our lives. Whereas my kids, we have a family plan for Apple Music, and they get whatever they want on demand. They don't have to go, work in some minimum wage job to get their music. It's just there for them. So that's pretty awesome. I was a Beats subscriber because Beats big selling point was they had human created playlists, which I thought were actually really good. So I was already on board before Apple bought them. And I continue to be a big fan. I think the family plan is a great deal if you have kids. And, you get in, I think $15 a month, and you get up to, is it 5 people? We have 4 in our family.
Yeah, I believe it's 5.
Yeah. And so that's like all the music you can eat for $15 a month for 5 people. I mean, that's pretty great. And then once again, it gets that platform advantage. If you have a HomePod, it just plays your music. If the integration with Siri is the best with Apple Music. So kind of everything just kind of works together.
Yeah, it's even available on the web, and I don't know whose library is bigger. Apple and Spotify just hit each other back and forth, right, month to month or year to year about what's going on. But I've never really had an issue where there's something I wanted that Apple Music didn't have, and because it's built into music, and I was going to say music and iTunes, but music and music on iOS and macOS. It just is native, right? It feels like it's just music in your library. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to Spotify to listen to music. I'm just doing it the same way I have since iTunes came out, 200 years ago. So I really like that. I think Apple is doing a good job with it. I think they had a lot of ground to catch up. Spotify was really good at playlists and those sorts of things. But I think Apple has done a really good job with this. And I think they know it's really, really important.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Spotify may be better. But Apple Music Plus is they call. I always get Apple Music is good enough for me, at least. And honestly, it's really good. I mean, I was just listening to some obscure music the other day. I'm a big fan of Dexter Gordon. I went deep on Dexter, and they had so many albums in there that I'd never even heard of. I mean, it's great. Okay, so let's go from music to TV. That's the new thing Apple's done is Apple TV Plus. What do you think of that?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
I feel like I'm not as hard on it as some people are. I mean, it's certainly not Netflix or HBO, but neither was Netflix or HBO in their first year. I think they've got some solid entries. I haven't paid for it yet, so it's been pretty easy to watch it. My wife and I are watching Dickinson. I really enjoyed what's the space one? What was it called?
For All Mankind.
For All Mankind. I watched
really
the whole
enjoyed
thing.
I enjoyed that a lot.
The big one that everybody was talking about, I watched like one episode of it and I'm like, nah, I'm just not.
bailed.
What's funny? I'm not a fan of these, post-apocalyptic, dystopian future stuff. It's just such a downer, I don't need it. So anyway, but I mean, they've had some good shows. The Amazing Stories I've been watching, and I was a big fan of the original run of it, so I've enjoyed those. So they've got some good content, but it's going to take a long time. It's just they don't have a catalog, and the other thing is it came out at the same time as Disney Plus, and Disney Plus is amazing. I mean, it's just like such a good price. And so much great content. And I know I'm a Star Wars nerd and they've really pushed all my buttons there, but it's not just that. It's all that other stuff they put on there. I mean, I feel like Disney Plus is the gold standard in a lot of ways. And Apple does not stand up to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Apple, out of all the streaming services out there, they're the only one that you said you don't have the back catalog, right? Netflix and Hulu, they have, in some cases, decades of content they've purchased the rights to. Apple's not playing that game. It's all original content. And that does mean the library is smaller. I think Apple's smartest move here, though, was making it free for a year when you purchase an Apple device. So I mean, how many people are paying for Apple TV at this point? Like nobody, right? Everyone on there has it for free. The question is how many people will renew. For me, I'll pay for another year to watch For All Mankind and The Morning Show. Those are the two that my wife and I really enjoyed. We're watching Home right now, which is also really good, but I haven't really explored any of the others. None of the other ones have really jumped out at me, but I think I'd pay for another year to see where those two shows go at least.
Yeah. I feel like the good news is Apple has enough money that they can give them some room to make something.
Mm-hmm.
But the lack of an extra catalog does, I think, affect it. I mean, it was funny when this pandemic hit, there was a bunch of people writing business articles saying this is Apple's chance to go in and buy Disney,
Yeah.
And I was just thinking to myself, please don't let them do that. But it is if they're serious about this, they are going to have to find some more content, I think, or pay for a lot of new content.
Yep.
I also think their pricing is messed up. I mean, Apple is more than Disney Plus, and it is so much less. I don't know if they want people to stick around. I don't know if they're going to stay at $9.99 a month.
It's too high. And again, no one's really paying for it. So there's that, but it's too much.
I do think that Apple should, if they're going to come up with a single price, all you can eat for everything, they should definitely do that before everybody comes up for their renewal on Apple TV Plus.
Yeah, I've been curious about how that timing will go.
Yeah, because I think there's going to be a mass exodus if they don't.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to say, okay, we're going to give you all of these services for X dollars, and then it just feels like something you're getting in extra, as opposed to, no, I'm going to pay $10 a month for 3 shows. So I'm going to pay $120 a year for 3 shows. That's not going to feel very good. Apple News and News Plus. This is something that's kind of gone up and down as we've been going through our run of Mac Power users. News Plus was the first thing they released with this latest kind of round of subscription services. It's $10 a month, and it gives you access to hundreds of magazines and major newspapers. What are your thoughts, Stephen?
I didn't use Apple News before this, and I tried the Apple News Plus membership and the trial. It wasn't for me either. Apple News is useful. Like, my wife loves it because it's curated to the stuff she wants to read from a bunch of different sources. There's human editors working behind the scenes doing things. But it's just not the way I want to consume news. Like, if I want to read a website, I'm going to put it in my RSS reader, and then I may check the New York Times or something, various media outlets when I want to. Having it all in the Apple News app, it just doesn't work for me. And News Plus, I couldn't really find the content that I wanted. And a lot of the News Plus stuff, at least at the beginning, was formatted basically as PDFs. So like the layout wasn't very good on a bunch of stuff. And News Plus really, to me, feels half-baked. And I don't know many people who are paying for it and using the plus aspect of it these days.
So I tried the free 30 days and then unsubscribed, but I have gone back this last month. I have paid for a month. I'm going to write about it at Mac Sparky. It started as an experiment, but I'll tell you the content is better now. It's more accessible. There's a couple magazines that I really wanted to read, and now with all in the state of the world here, as we record this on May 4, 2020, there's a lot of news sources I would like to kind of keep up with more than I normally would. And I'm actually finding it better than I thought I would. I mean, I have more positive feelings for it. Again, it's $10 a month, feels kind of like a lot, but it is a lot of content that has unlocked for me. But another thing is like Mary, I use Apple News every day, even before I unlock News Plus, because I find that as my primary news source. I like the way that it works for me. It figures out the stuff I like, and it's customizable. So I've been using that basically as my curated news.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I think that the way Apple has really put like human curators in the mix, like I think they're doing a good job with it. This is a very hard problem to solve. Like Facebook really struggled with its news platform. Google does, I think, a pretty okay job. I think Apple's doing a good job. This is not a fit for me. I do wonder, though, that if Apple were to do a bundle of services, I think that could only help Apple News Plus. Right? I think more people would be willing to check it out because that $10 a month, I think, is, unless you're just reading a bunch of magazines, that seems like a lot for what you get for the News Plus aspect of it.
Well, one thing I really appreciate, I have some friends that worked on the iBooks people that are working on Apple News Plus, and I understand that they've gone to great lengths to make this curation something that works for you, and it doesn't matter whether you're conservative or liberal. They've tried to do it in a way that you get good news, but true news. I mean, I think they really are taking that role seriously more than some of the other companies in Silicon Valley. And don't write me your hate email. Mm-hmm. We don't try and talk about politics here, but But I think they were trying to do a job where no matter what your interest is, they're going to get you stuff you like. I mean, I guess to give another example, I get all the news about what's going on in the world right now, but I also get Star Wars news in my newsfeed, and it's great. And so it's just, I find it really good. And I don't watch a lot of network TV, so this is really a great source for me. So I'm willing to pay for it for a little while. I get it that it seems like it's a lot of money, but some of the magazines I've been reading, I've been getting my $10 a month out of that.
Good. No, I'm glad to hear that because I think the rhetoric, at least amongst tech nerds, has been pretty negative. So that is really fascinating to hear that your experience with it has been pretty good.
In fact, I just opened it while we're talking, and I see something amazing that happened. I guess I might as well. Taika Waititi is going to make a Star Wars movie.
Oh
man.
Well, it's May the 4th, so
you said it, Brady.
These days.
You said it.
I didn't realize that was today because I've muted in Tweetbot all of those jokes over the years.
Yeah,
and I didn't even realize it until I think you said that we were recording on May 4th. I was like, oh yeah, look at that! It is Star Wars Day.
Yeah.
Are you? Do you dress up to celebrate? Like, do you have a ritual?
My wife was making fun of me because I don't have any Star Wars attire on.
What?
But it's always in my heart, man.
Okay.
It's always in my heart. I'm going to watch later. This is what the world we live in. So Disney Plus has a great finalized season for the Clone Wars. The last episode airs today. I'm going to be watching it while FaceTiming some friends, because that's what you do these days.
That's pretty nerdy.
Yeah, it is. The trick is you got to get it. You got to pause it at the Disney Plus screen so you all start it at the right time. Right. Otherwise, somebody's like, "Whoa, I don't get," then you're like, "What's about to happen?"
Mm-hmm.
So that's the trick. Apple Arcade. It is the golden child, right, of the Apple services. Everybody loves it.
Is that true? It's another one that I tried during the trial. And I'm not a big game player, so maybe that's what it comes down to, but not for me.
Yeah. I honestly think if the Apple Arcade service was $1 a month, I'm not sure you would sign up for it. Right?
Yeah. If it was bundled, maybe I would get it.
So I think you're wrong. I think this is a big win because so many of the games in the Apple App Store turned into slot machines for children, where you start playing it, and then you got to get more gold stars, and you got to do these microtransactions, and that was the people making the money, and then the more people made money, the more people copied the model, and then all of a sudden, all of the games in the iPhone were trash. And as a parent, if your kid downloaded a quote unquote free game, you could end up spending, lots of money inside that game. And the idea behind Apple Arcade is $5 a month. The games are complete. There's no add-on purchases, and they're made by really good game studios. And that is exactly what they've delivered. When it first came out, they had a lot of really great titles, but they continue to come out with really great titles every month. And I think particularly, like, you should be. Do your kids play games, Stephen? I know you don't, but do your kids play games?
Not really. I mean, they're really like board game players and stuff.
Okay,
they've been playing a lot of Pokemon on the Switch and Mario Kart and stuff. But if they were into gaming, we would do this, right? For all the reasons you said. There's no ads, there's no in-app purchase. They're all high quality, but they're not, and so it really hasn't come up.
Yeah, and we haven't mentioned with all of this, like the $10 I'm paying for News Plus, all my kids get access to all of it too. Same thing with the arcade. Everybody in your family share gets all those games for $5 a month. Your entire family has free games. If you have people in your life or you individually like games, I would recommend doing the trial on this because not only is it less expensive than almost every other game model in the App Store, these are really good games. I mean, they're fun, and I have subscribed, and I do play them. So sorry, man.
No, it's cool.
Can't help myself.
Disagree. It's fine.
Yeah, but I think they're great, and I do pick one or two at a time. But then every month I find another one or two that I want to play. So
that's what I was going to ask about the longevity of it. I don't know if there's been like a single big hit in Apple Arcade. Maybe there is, and I'm not tuned into it. But do you feel like there's something new when you're ready for something new?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
And they're the type of games that I like eclectic games. I like games that are not super stressful. I'm not into shooters, which wouldn't make sense on an iOS device anyway. But I like games that are just kind of a fun little adventure. And there are so many like that in here. But anyway, to each his own. I think they priced it right, and I think they're delivering the goods. And if you've got gamers in your life, I would absolutely try this to see what they think about it. Like if you've got kids that like just want to play Call of Duty, they probably aren't going to be into this. But if you run, I mean, there's certain types of gamers,
totally.
And that's fine, But if you just kind of like pick up and play casual, fun games, I think for smaller kids and people who I'm not into the real serious games. I don't want to do homework to play a video game.
Right.
This is for me.
Okay. No, that's great. And I think there are a lot of people who fit in that category. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by The Uptake, a new show on all things tech and community from our friends over at Microsoft. I'm obviously huge into podcasting. I love finding new podcasts, and The Uptake has been one that I've really enjoyed because they put people together in various corners of technology and tell their stories about building community. That's my favorite thing about Mac Power Users. My favorite thing about Relay is the community that we have. The Uptake is all about that. It also has how-tos on professional learning development. If you want to build your own community, there's a lot of stuff to get out of it as well. Each episode features members of the tech community, and the conversations are fun. Each show has a focused topic, guest interviews, local and global community news, plus updates on events, conferences, that sort of thing. And just so you have an idea of what to expect, I listened to an episode about this teacher. He wanted to build education apps for his students. And so he became a developer on the Microsoft platforms, met people on forums. They helped him work on his code. He got to pitch some ideas to Microsoft. It was really neat to hear his point of view and his story as he shifted careers in a really, really big way. They've talked about personal and career growth, along with imposter syndrome, which is a huge deal in the tech scene, and a topic they called Less Code, More Power, which is also a lot of fun. So go and check it out. Just search for The Uptake wherever you get your shows. That's Uptake, UPTAKE, or click the link in the show notes to check it out. Our thanks to The Uptake and Microsoft for their support of this show and Relay FM.
So one of my worries with the growth of Apple services is the point that, this is suddenly a profit center for them. And where traditionally the Apple Cloud services were a way to make their products better and give you a reason to want to buy their hardware, now Apple's looking at this as a way to raise money.
Yeah, so I went looking for this. I don't follow Apple's quarterly results very closely, but our friend Jason Snell does. And as we're recording this, Apple just had their Q2 results come out. If you look at their revenue by category, services is 23% of their revenue this last quarter. And to put that in context, the iPhone is an even 50%. The Mac is 9%. The iPad is 7%. And then basically other things, so Apple Watch, HomePod, etc. That's 11%. So those things are bigger than the Mac and the iPad, but the services is second only to the iPhone. That's an incredible part of their business.
It's 3 times the revenue of the iPad.
Yeah, I mean, we spend so much time thinking and like poring over the details of the iPad, and again, services is this behemoth just really weighing over everything. And like you said, that raises some questions about this business model shift. So do you have any thoughts on, is how Apple is handling this? Do you think they're making good or bad decisions around it?
Well, typical Apple, we don't know enough. They're not going to share all the details. There are some things they have done that feel consumer hostile to me. In particular is the photo. I mean, the poster child of this is photo storage, right? I've whined about this on the show for years, but you buy an Apple device, it takes amazing pictures. It's got a 12 megapixel sensor, so it takes big pictures, but you only get this piddly amount of storage, online storage. So for most people, they're going to be like, well, I'm not going to spend money I'm not going to give them money every month for storage. So they take pictures of their kids, they get these great pictures, and then their phone falls into a lake and the pictures are gone. Whereas if Apple had just given everybody the storage they needed, you would know, you go buy another iPhone and you get your pictures back. I mean, I just think it's so silly to be charging money for that, given the price of the devices. But, 23% of the income is these services. Now, the question is, are they charging me money to store my photos so they can go to the stockholders and say, look how much we made off services. We got Dave to give us even more money. Or are they doing that because they don't have the capacity and they're using money as a gate to keep people from overloading their servers? I don't know. That is a situation where you look at the money they're making off services and you say, geez, wouldn't it be great if they only made 20% of their services, but everybody who bought an iPhone had all their pictures backed up?
I'd be totally fine with that trade-off. Honestly, I think it would be good.
Yeah, but like I said, I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, pictures are huge files, and maybe if you multiply the number of iPhones in the world times the number of pictures, they don't have enough server farms to store them all.
There may not be. It may be that no one does.
Yeah,
I mean, we just don't know.
Yeah.
The thing that I think about here is the potential issues around advertising these services to customers. Like things like you open the music app for the first time, there's a full page banner for Apple Music. You open the TV app, it's a bunch of advertising for Apple TV Plus. I don't think they've crossed any lines with that, but I also don't know quite where the line is. For a long time, there was a lot of conversation around applications cannot send notifications as advertisements, but Apple's not really been willing to enforce that, as we have seen over the years. And in fact, they do it themselves for some of these things, right? You'll get a new notification about a new TV show in Apple TV Plus, and you can manage those notifications, of course, but I feel like it's a very slippery slope when you start going to your customers for service revenue. Even if the service is really good, it's like you got to respect the customers for who they are and what they've already paid you. And again, I don't know quite where the line is, but I think that's a really tricky balance. And I'm afraid that it's really easy for any company, including Apple, to fall on the wrong side of that from time to time.
Well, I mean, there's different priorities. I'm sure the people that are making the just to keep beating a dead horse, I'm sure the people on the photos team and the people on the camera app team absolutely want you to store all your photos. And then the question is, well, what about the flip side of the people that are responsible for services are saying, no, we should charge money for this. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, there's a big caveat here. We don't know. Maybe the server team is saying, hey, guys, you're going to kill us if you do that. So there could be a good reason. But I do think that, and another good example is that all of these add-on services, there is no plan where you get all of them at a discounted price. Right now, Apple is maximizing the profits on these as much as they can, which is something that company is very good at, which is one of the reasons we like it, because we know they're going to be around a long time. They've got a good business model, but there is a line, and sometimes it feels like it gets crossed.
So how about a services report card? We've talked about a lot of different things, and maybe we wind this up by talking about individual grades for services.
Yeah. All right. Let's start. iCloud and everything it means.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a solid B. I think most of the services work as advertised. The big knock against it is the thing we keep coming back to is the amount of storage you get is just punitive unless you pay.
Yeah. I'm going to give it a B minus because I feel like it's still not quite as solid as it should be. There's still weird stuff that occasionally happens. And I want to get to a point where there's never weird stuff happening with my cloud service. Maybe even a C. But I also feel like they've come so far, it's hard for me to say C because they really have come a long way. All right, B minus.
Okay, B minus. Where do you land on Apple Music?
A, solid A for me. I think it's just great. It's priced right. It's a great service. I love the way it integrates. I love the curated lists. But I was a Beats member before it became Apple Music, so I'm so on board with this, and I get my money's worth every day.
I'm going to go with a B plus, really for the reason of it can be difficult to manage what files are local. It's easier on the Mac, and so on the iPhone, I have a playlist called for iPhone. And if I get a new phone or I need to re-download something, I make sure that album or artist is on that playlist, and then I just download that playlist. It's like you kind of have to jump through some hoops to manage if you want files local. And back in the time where we could go places in airplanes, that was a big deal for me because like last year I flew all over the country, I think I like at least one trip a month last year. And so it was a big deal. And I think they could do a better job around managing sort of online, offline access. And so that dings it a little bit in my mind. But other than that, I'm really happy with it. I think they've done a really, really good job in terms of expanding out of the Beats product, which is already very good, and like putting an Apple-y touch on it.
Okay, how about Apple TV Plus?
I'm going to go here with a C+. We have our handful of shows that we have enjoyed, but only really 3 of them. There's been a lot of stuff that just either doesn't look interesting or something like C, where I didn't even get through the first episode. I think it would be a more general video service if they had a back catalog. Like, I at least don't ever just like scrub through Apple TV Plus to see what there is to watch. On occasion, I will do that on Netflix or Hulu. But like, what is something that I caught previous seasons of, and I want to see there's a new season, right? Apple just doesn't have that yet. I think that will get better over time, but right now that's a ding against them.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a C as well. I just a solid C. I mean, it's passing for the first year. They got some good shows. They don't have a lot of shows, and it's there. But I feel like it needs time, and I think any network would need time that's starting. This is new for Apple. I wish they had started doing it years ago, but let's just see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Apple News and News Plus.
I think I gotta give it a D. It's not. Okay. It's not for me. This is my personal view, right? It's not for me. Yeah. I think News Plus is way too expensive, and it's just not It's not anything that I want. But that's my grade.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a C. If it was $5 a month, I'd give it a B. That's easy to say. Once again, it's easy to spend somebody else's money, but
of course,
it seems a little expensive. And but I think that it's solid. Apple Arcade.
Yeah, so I wrote C in the list, but I'm going to go with a B because I think you really reminded me how good it is for people who want casual games and people with kids who play games. So I will give it a B, even though I don't personally use it.
Yeah, A for me.
Okay.
A. Well, anyway, Apple services in the state of the platform overall, are you happy? What about overall grade for Apple and all the cloud services and everything they're doing?
Yeah, I think overall, I think that probably averages out to like a B-. I think there's clearly progress to be made, especially in some areas. But I think on the whole, for the things that most people use and rely on, I think it's pretty solid. And I think that's high praise from where they were a while back.
Yeah, I think B- is about right. I feel like I don't want to grade them on a curve because they have come so far. It's easy to say, well, they should get a B or an A because they're so much better. But they definitely have a lot of work to do still, and I think B- works. Hopefully next year we get a higher grade for them.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
Okay, well that about does it for the state of the platform for Apple services. Stick around after the music for the after show. We're going to talk about that brand new MacBook Pro 13-inch and a little bit about my studio move and my cable woes. Thank you to our sponsors, 1Password and the Uptake from Microsoft, and we'll see you next week.
All right, our first after show.
Yeah, why not, man? We've been talking about doing this for a long time. And so we occasionally come up with things that aren't really going to fit into the content of the show, but we don't want to wait for 2 months to talk about it on the next feedback show.
Yeah.
And this week we've got a couple of them. I think we should probably start with the exciting news about a new MacBook Pro.
Yeah, let's start there. So this morning, on a Monday, which is unusual, Apple released a revised 13-inch MacBook Pro. So this is not the 14-inch that I think a lot of us really wanted to see. It looks the same as the previous 13-inch. It is a touch heavier, but looks the same. Got the Magic Keyboard, so no more butterfly keyboard on any of the new MacBooks, which is fantastic. This was the last one to fall. And like before, it's split between 2-port machines, which are $12.99 and $14.99, and more expensive but noticeably more powerful and probably better 4-port machines at $17 and $19.99. Those prices, I think, are in line with where they were. The more expensive 2 machines have new 10th gen Intel processors, which is awesome. All of them have double the base storage. So now that base one gets 256 gigs, which is fantastic because for a while it was like 128 and that was just unacceptable. So I think it's a pretty solid update.
I'll tell you, I did not see coming was the split with the 2 and the 4-port machines again. I just did not see that. I thought with the state of the MacBook Air at this point, they would only have kind of the high-end MacBook Pro. Are you surprised by that?
I mean, I don't think they wanted that gap between the Air and then the 4-port MacBook Pro. Maybe they can't get the 4-port down to a cheaper price than $17.99. It's the ports, but it's also the processor and the RAM, right? The processor on the cheaper 2 is an eighth generation. It's got slower memory. The memory has a lower cap. The 2 high-end machines, you can go up to 32 gigs. So these really feel like kind of like different machines, and I just don't know what you would put in the middle. If there was a 15-inch MacBook Air, maybe that could go in the middle. So you have like 13 and 15 Air and then 13 and 15 and 13 and 16 Pro, but we don't have that. So the 2-core machine is still kind of in no man's land, I think, to hit the price points.
Yeah, I get it. But either way.
Yeah. And I think if you're looking at an entry-level MacBook Pro, you should seriously look at the MacBook Air as well. Yes, the Pro has all quad-core processor, but you can get that in the MacBook Air now. And maybe you don't need the touch bar, So I think there's a lot of overlap in the type of consumer who would look at the base MacBook Pro and the Air. If you're looking at the $17.99 MacBook Pro with a $2,000 13-inch MacBook Pro, the Air is sort of out of your scope because these are much more powerful machines, it looks like.
And amen, the dark days of the butterfly keyboard are now over.
Yeah, they're only still for sale in the fabric-covered smart keyboard for the iPads, which are still around. But everything else is using the new scissor switch, and I think it's great.
And there's really not been any issue with those fabric-covered keyboards because they're fabric-covered.
Crumbs can't get in them because they're inside a little cocoon of fabric.
Yeah. No, it's great. I'm glad, we all expected this. I was hoping that we'd get a 14-inch, so you'd get a little bigger screen. But, the 13-inch is a very popular size for a computer, and good on Apple for getting the update out. And thank goodness there's no more of these butterfly keyboards being sold.
And I think a 14 is still possible in the future, but it's not now. So I don't know if we could write that off completely because I think it would make more sense separating it from the MacBook Air, but I don't know. Time will tell.
Yeah, I don't think it's anytime soon.
No. I think if you were waiting for a new small MacBook Pro, now is a pretty good time to jump on.
Yeah. The more important news for Stephen is that, because of the COVID-19, everything, I lost my studio. So both of my kids are home, which is awesome. I love having my kids home. But I had to move my studio to a downstairs part of the house, which gave me an opportunity to undo all of the cabling under my desk and redo it yesterday. And I made the decision that I will no longer gaff tape my drive to my monitor stand arm. It's now sitting on my desk. I'm looking at it right now.
Yay! That's good.
Sitting on my desk. It's got a cable coming down. It's one more thing on my desk. I don't like to have anything on my desk, Stephen. But it's sitting on my desk.
I'm glad. Would you be willing to put some pictures in the newsletter this week?
I will. I will. It's getting there. My cabling situation isn't as good as it would be if Stephen were here. I wish Stephen was here because you're so good at that. But
let me look at these pictures again. Look, I'm willing to forgive you. You've just moved in, right? Things are still settling, right?
Yeah.
You got a pile of boxes to the right.
Yeah.
But I think you'll get there.
I made that rookie mistake. Like I always figure I'm going to get this right, and I always make dumb mistakes. Like I turned my monitor to the side so I would have enough room to, get to the back of it when accessing my cables. But what I forgot to do was to pull it forward, because when you're on a boom arm, you can pull it pretty far forward.
Right.
And I secured down the power and some of the major cabling underneath.
Yeah.
And I went to record this morning, and I went to pull my monitor toward me. And it's like, no, I'm not going any further.
That's not going to work.
So it's like 18 inches away from me. I think that's probably what people would tell me it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm used to having it closer. So I'm going to have to get underneath and do that. A couple things I changed with this time is I'm using more gaff tape than I did in the past on the underside of the desk.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I use a combination of like adjustable zip ties and some of those plastic clips that you can clip on the command strips type stuff.
Sure, yeah.
But I just gaff tape stuff to the downside of the desk. I'm not sure why I didn't do that sooner. And the same thing with the bongo ties. I used to put bongo ties around all the legs of my desk, to hold the cabling as it went down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just using gaff tape now. I think it looks nicer.
Yeah, I use long Velcro strips for that when I need to do it. So
yeah.
And if you haven't heard the good news about bongo ties, they're my favorite cable management thing in the world. I'm going to have a link in the show notes because everyone should own some of these.
Yeah. Although some of my older bongo ties, man, they kind of fell apart in the old room. The rubber is degrading on them.
Yeah. Oh, it's rubber. It's going to happen.
Yeah. But but overall, I mean, it's looking really good. I will put in the newsletter and in the show notes this week a picture of the underside of my desk, and you guys can make fun of it. But it still needs work. But I kind of enjoy that too, like you, getting underneath and figuring out what goes where. But man, I'm really mad at myself about the monitor extension issue.
Yeah, you got to go back and tweak that, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway,
that's the beauty of having your display on a stand; it doesn't ever move anywhere. It's great.
What's just kind of funny is that the downside of that is with the iMac Pro, to get to your ports, you got to like climb over your desk if you can't move it. But what's funny is every time I do this, I lose cables along the way. Like I wrapped everything in the upstairs studio before I moved downstairs, so I had everything here wrapped nicely for me. And when I finished, I had like 8 cables left that I wasn't using anymore.
Yeah, I did that when I got my Mac Pro. I redid it under my desk, and I found like a USB-C cable that wasn't plugged into anything on either end. It's like, what are you doing here? You're just
exactly.
hanging out with your friends.
Yeah, because I am a big fan of these underside drives, and I had some extras that I didn't use anymore, and so I had stuff going on down there. I had a power cable. I'm not sure what that's for, but it's all good. And but the cabling situation, I just feel like between you and Katie, I'm always the worst cabler on the Mac Power users.
Well, it's you'll get there. You can always improve.
I really, honestly, I dislike, I like the OWC drive enclosure. It's got a cool blue light in it, but the fact that it's got this single cable hanging down that I look at every time I sit on my computer, I really don't like that.
Yeah, the trick is to disable the LED. Just unplug it.
Yeah, but even the LED doesn't bother me so much as the cable.
Okay.
And because of the high-speed drive enclosure, as we talked about on the show way too much, you can't get a long cable. So I can't even run the cable around with the other cables.
Yeah, it's just like hanging out on its own.
Yeah, man, that's madness.
Yeah, that is a bummer. I don't miss having that issue with my iMac Pro.
Yes, that's right. You've got it internal.
They're all internal now, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is I can either look at this cable or spend $10,000.
Yep.
I think I'll look at the cable.
That's the wise choice here.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoy the after show. We'll be back next week with more Mac Power Users.
Sounds good.